Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of Stewarding Heaven's Finances. Woo! Yeah! My name's James, and this is Tanika, and we've been really enjoying running through this series on finances and how, as a church, both collectively and individually, we can steward what God has provided to us well. Before we kick things off, I just wanted to draw your attention to this exciting table, which you might look and go, what on earth has that got to do with finances? It all will become clear. Most of that I actually found in Raf's bedroom. Have a think about, we'll kind of demystify that as we go along. But we're going to kick things off by praying, and we really want to give this time to God. We'll be here for a couple of hours and there'll be a short break in between, and then there'll be time dotted throughout for you guys to have conversations in small groups. I'm going to pray first. Lord, we thank you for this lovely day today. Thank you that it's sunny and bright outside, and even though we're inside, thank you that we've got some time together to really get into some practical things around finances and how to manage things well. We pray that that you bless this session. Pray that anything that we say today that's not from you would be forgotten, and anything that is for you, from you stirring in our hearts, that we would take away and really receive that, Lord. I pray that this would this session and the final one next month would have eternal consequences in how we do things, both as a church and in our own lives individually. I pray this in Jesus' name, for His glory. Amen. So, first things first, we're going to have a quick recap about why we're doing this series. Quick show of hands, who was here last time? And has anybody caught the recording yet? We've got the Great. So hopefully we're just going to talk a little bit about why we're doing this series, and then we're going to get stuck into some of the details. So the context is that session 1 was very much about laying some biblical foundations. So it was more about kind of looking at Scripture. What does the Bible say about money? Steph mentioned in his preach today that Jesus talked about it a lot, probably more than anything else. So we want to look at what the Bible does say about it, because it's a particularly important thing, particularly when you're living in a place like London, which is really expensive. We want to help ourselves collectively and individually to steward money well, faithfully, generously. Opportunities to share testimony. So we've heard from people last week. We've got some more exciting stuff lined up today and next month as well. And also we wanted to just be really practical. Tanika and I have got a particular passion for just being really open about money, finances, and all of those kind of things, and just kind of like maybe there's certain elements practically that we can kind of talk through that might be helpful for people in the church. Preface all of that by saying this is not financial advice. We want to be really clear and open about that. We're not experts at all. This is kind of just our lived experience and sharing a bit of that. But it's very important that this isn't a kind of a piece of church advice. This is just kind of sharing a bit of our experience. So we would encourage anybody, if you want to look at this further, or anything that comes up today that you think I'd like to look at that, do seek your own independent financial advice. So I'm going to hand over to Tanika, who's going to talk a little bit about the collective 3 sessions of the whole book.
Right. Well, we thought it would be helpful to just do a quick recap on the biblical principles, because this is all about loving Jesus, and that's the foundation of it all. So, there we go. So, let's look at a bit of scripture. No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And in Ecclesiastes it says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. And basically we are talking about money, we are talking about stewardship, but this isn't about accumulation, this isn't about getting as much as we can, this isn't about money in and of itself, it's about stewardship. and our heart to respecting God with what he's given us. So the principles around money is we're to be content with what we have and with what God has blessed us with. We're to be generous, which this church is, but we need to continue to do that. And we're not to love, crave, or set our hopes in money. Our hope is firmly in Jesus, and money is just what we use to honour him and others. And we're to work diligently. We're to be hard-working as Christians in whatever field that we're called to. In terms of giving, we looked at it should be in proportion to what you earn. It should be given generously and in love for God and for others. And in savings, we looked at Joseph and how he spent 7 years saving up when things were doing really well, and then the next 7 years when there was a famine, all the things that he saved up previously not only served his own household, but it was serving other nations as well. So that was quite a powerful story of just how savings can be really useful. And then we looked at investing, which from the survey is not something that many of us actually do, and it's something that we are encouraging each other that we need to look into a bit more. And with that, we looked into the parable of the talents, where you have the 3 employees, each given 10, 5 and 1 talent, and the one with the little actually buried it, and the reason why is because he felt afraid and didn't know what to do. But that's not what God calls us to do with what he's given us. He's called us to live in courage and to really look at multiplying what he's given us. And so that was a really useful just parable to look at in terms of just actually it's good to invest. And then we also looked at the fact that it's not just investing money, even though that's what we're primarily talking about. It's looking at your gifts, your skills, and just everything, and not just money. So, 4 principles of good stewardship, which I do want you guys to just bear that in mind with each of the topics that we're talking about. I found this really helpful myself, but the 4 principles of good stewardship. Number 1, we are supervising on behalf of God. So everything we have, our possessions, it's God's. So the way we look at our finances is very much, this is yours, God. How do you want me to use this? How do you want me to save? How do you want me to invest? How do you want me to give? Psalms 24 verse 1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." So yeah, we believe everything belongs to God. So when we talk about our saving and investing today in our budgets, foundationally, it's God's, and we're asking him what does he want us to do with it. Number 2, responsibility. So God gave Adam and Eve responsibility in the garden. He's like, I want you to look after this garden. And I think this is how we should view our time, this is how we should view our wealth and our skills as a garden. It's like God's given this to us. How do we cultivate a really beautiful garden in our lives? How does that represent a really beautiful, cultivated garden for God? And we need pruning, weeding to become fruitful. So that's quite a helpful picture in terms of responsibility as well. And accountability, and this is probably something that most of us, I would say, may struggle with, because I think talking about our own finances can be very, very awkward, and sometimes you feel a bit of shame about it if things aren't going great, or if you just don't know what to do. Admitting that can be quite hard. So I think part of these sessions is to really encourage us as family to be accountable to one another. So in your running partners, you talk about different things that are going on in your life. Why not draw your finances into that and just shed some light on it in a helpful way? So this is about staying accountable. And then finally, just viewing this whole subject as in the context of heavenly reward. So not all of us are going to be called to have a lot. Some of us will be called to have a little, but everything we do is for that heavenly reward. And in Colossians 3 it says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." So, it's all about heaven, it's all about eternity, so please do look at everything in the context of that whilst we're talking. And now I'm going to hand over to James to talk about budgeting. Very exciting.
Amazing. Thanks, Nika. So that's chapter 1. So chapter 1 is very much a kind of recap of what we did last time, about a month ago. Chapter 2, it's a big one. So chapter 2, we've got all this stuff on the screen. Hopefully the slides are quite clear for those tuning in online. Bit of buzzing going on. We'll see if that passes. But I'll read them out very quickly. So we'll be looking at having a vision and making a plan, looking at budget planning and monitoring. We'll have a look at savings and pensions, and then we're going to have a look at investing in a whole range of different things, which could be stock market, business, property. We'll unpack all of that, and then have a look at the very end at financial administration. Gordon has gone for a walkabout to try and sort the beeping out, so please do bear with us. It could be something to do with Dawn. We'll have a break about halfway through. We'll see how it goes. Some of these are quite meaty topics, and as I said, there's plenty of time for discussion as we go. So first one is having a vision and making a plan. So the spotlight on scripture for this one, we had a look at this a little bit last time, I think. There's lots of great stuff in Proverbs, lots of wisdom in there. This one particularly, Proverbs 16 verse 3, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. I love that because it doesn't say plan your way to whatever, it says commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. It's very much talking about that God is in control, and yet that's still part of and can still be part of our plan and our approach to things. And then in Luke 14:28, suppose, this is Jesus speaking, suppose one of you wants to build a tower, won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? Again, I mean, it seems quite obvious, but it's really important. You know, it's important to plan, and so I think these two things sit really quite well, and hopefully will be a good kind of bit of foundation of the scripture as we have a look at what this means practically. So last time at the very end, you might remember for those that were here or tuned into the recording, we set a little bit of homework for session 3, which is called Future Finances. So just a reminder here, has anybody had a little think about this? So this one was where we were going to set some short, medium and long-term financial goals. What we'd love is for you over the next month, ahead of session 3, to be thinking about some of these things, what those goals could be. I mean, that could be anything from, I want to be able to create a budget for the first time within the next 3 months. That could be a short-term goal. Right the way through to 5 years plus could be something to do with a pension or to do with a house deposit or to do with providing for family in some way. It could be anything, or starting a business, whatever it might be. But you see, the first step is seeking God for that, and so I think it's really important. And God calls us to different things, as Tanika shared. So yeah, we'd love to kind of just remind everybody here to have a think about that. And then the little purple blob at the bottom, come ready to share. There might be 2 or 3 of us that are happy to share a little bit about what God's been revealing over the last month. And then Tanika and I will go away and plan session 3 according to what comes in some of these things, so that it's as relevant as possible for people in our church. So if we get on to budget planning and monitoring, those of you that know me well will know that I absolutely love spreadsheets. Let's just be honest, there's going to be too many slides here with spreadsheet things on for most people, but I absolutely love it. So I'm going to whittle through it quite quickly because I appreciate that this doesn't rock everybody's boat quite in the way that it does for mine. But before we do that, we're going to head over to menti.com. So if you've got a phone or device with you, head over to menti.com and enter the code on screen, which I will do a little bit of juggling around now and see if I can get this on here. There we go. So the question is, do you have a weekly, monthly or annual budget? The code is at the top, so all you need to do is head over to menti.com, that's menti.com, and then you should have a code box and type in 4706 5338. And the question is, do you have a weekly, monthly or annual budget? And just to clarify, this, what I would describe is something that you've got that's written down in some form. It could be an Excel spreadsheet, it could be a piece of software, whatever it is. But have you got something that you manage your money with in terms of setting a budget, whether that's weekly, monthly, or annually. So as we can see, as that's coming along, we've got how many people? Yeah, it's probably everybody. So quite balanced, but yeah, a good chunk of people that don't. So it'd be good to look into that. Why? Why haven't you got a spreadsheet? What is going on? So we're going to have a look at that. So good to think about that. We did this last time with a few different things. It's really interesting to get a flavour within the church in terms of lots of different areas of finance. So good, kind of probably quite a good split in terms of people that do have a budget, people that don't. It'd be good to talk about why. Talk for those that do. Could they share more information with others? For those that don't, is there a reason that you don't, or would you like to? How would you be able to engage and have a look at that together? And now I'll head straight back over, if I can, to the PowerPoint spreadsheet. Not to come out here. This is the problem with split screens. Right. So this next bit, in terms of budgeting. I mean, these are a lot of these are kind of general statements. They're not, they're not kind of necessarily factual, but I want to kind of just draw a few of them out. So having a budget generally means that you're more likely to keep on top of your things financially, generally speaking. You're less likely to end up in debt. Apparently the average credit card debt per household in the UK is over £2,300. According to the Money Charity, May 2023, and that's excluding mortgages, things like that, so that's kind of credit card debt. If you've got a budget, you're more likely to avoid financial problems if you've got kind of unexpected costs like broken dishwashers or car repairs, if you something that comes up unexpectedly, because you factor that into part of your planning as you go. If you've got a budget, you're in a strong position generally to take on a mortgage or loan. You might have a good credit rating. All of those kind of things can come and be strengthened by practicing good financial budget planning. And then also you're able to save for things that what we might describe as nice to haves, things like holidays, days out, things like that. And having a budget means that you're able to help with those kinds of things. And of course, last and certainly not least on this particular slide, plan your giving is a really important one. And we did a little talk in small groups last time about what does it mean in terms of giving as a church, how often do we review our giving. And I think part of having a budget process enables that process of giving to be much more intentional. So they're kind of some of the headlines. Next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about choosing a budget method. Now, there's loads of different ways you can do this, but I'm just going to kind of cover a couple of different things on the screen. So the first one is, has anybody heard of the kind of 50-30-20 rule? So 50% of net income on essentials. So for those, and apologies, I'm speaking as someone who has a salary, so I'll be speaking as opposed to freelance or self-employed, I'll be speaking to someone who gets a regular income that is net of tax, pension contributions, national insurance, and all of that. But please hear the same principles if you are self-employed. 50% of net income on essentials, that's things like rent or mortgage, bills, food, insurance, childcare costs, giving, we'd call that an essential. 30% of net income on non-essentials, and that could be things like leisure, shopping, birthdays, things that are important and nice to build into what you do with your money, but you could cut back on them if you needed to. And then 20% on boosting your savings or paying off debts in terms of additional payments. We would personally, in our family, we would see the top one, essentials. We would say if you've got debts that you are paying off, that would be regarded as an essential. So the bottom one, the 20%, is paying that additionally. So in our case, we have a mortgage. We would see that bottom line as could we make an additional payment in order to get the mortgage to come down beyond the term that we have. Of course, it's not always possible when you're living in London to have something that matches exactly with that. And I would probably say from experience, ours doesn't look particularly like that, but that's a helpful way of thinking about the different kinds of expenditure that you might have in terms of essentials and non-essentials and so on. I think also it's just worth saying that kind of the point about developing a deep understanding of where your money is going. If you have a budget process that is up from experience, it's really helpful in knowing what your financial footprint looks like. So that's a real benefit to it. And then this bottom one is probably my favourite element to budgeting, is actually monitoring it. It's one thing setting a budget, but actually keeping on top of it, reflecting month by month, week by week, whatever you might want to do. I really enjoy that process. A lot of people won't enjoy it. Hopefully the spreadsheets will give you a little bit of a flavour of why I enjoy it. So I've got a budget on here. Appreciate that it's quite small, so we're going to zoom into key bits. But basically what we've got is income along the top. In green, we've got what I define as fixed expenses in the kind of light orange, and then the bottom darker orange is variable expenses. We'll go through this in a bit more detail, and we've got some stuff to do with savings at the bottom, and then on the right hand side I'll come back to. Disclaimer from the start, this is a fake spreadsheet, so it's not a glimpse into any particular person's finances, but what it does do is it represents a two-person context, if you like. So I've got, on this particular one, I've got somebody that has a net income of about 3,000 and then 1,500, and then the costs, broadly speaking, that I've plugged into this would hopefully be representative of what you might experience if you live in London. So hopefully some of these numbers might resonate with you in terms of your own finances. So the way that I do it, and the way that Astra and I kind of look after our finances with this particular spreadsheet is as follows, and hopefully it's helpful just to give you a flavour of how we do things. At the bottom, we've got an overview tab, which is what we're looking at now, and then we've got 12 tabs for one for each month of the year. There's a whole host of stuff built into this which kind of updates bits and bobs as you go along, and the basic principle is that you complete, as it says at the top left, you complete anything in yellow and the spreadsheet does the rest for you. So the first thing that we would do here is that we would fill in what we get in terms of our income. And I appreciate that if you're self-employed or even a business or anything like that, that this is this will be different month to month, so it'd be up to you how you do that, whether you look at a year's worth of work and kind of divide it by 12 to get an average, or whether you do it in a different way. But this particular one works pretty well for if you have a regular income coming through, for example, a salaried position. So you plug your things in there. Other income could be things like if you've got kids and you get child benefit, or if you get money for birthdays coming in, all of that kind of stuff, you can plug that in and you can average it out across the month. And you see the column next to the yellow one is the annual column, and that populates according to what you've plugged into the yellow one. So that's the first thing that we do. The second thing is we then plug in the fixed expenses. This part is generally super easy because you know how much your mortgage or your rent is, you know what your heating bill tends to be if you pay by fixed direct debit, and you know what your phone bill is, etc, etc, etc. I've got a whole bunch of things on here. I mean, your version of this would look potentially different and have fewer things. Like we haven't got a car, but I've got car insurance and car road tax on there, for example, because you could pay that monthly or you could pay that in terms of a year, but it's a fixed expense. And then scrolling further down, we head to the variable expenses. This one is a bit tricky, and I'll be honest, this is where Astra and I have found most of our conversations around finance typically are in this space here, because they're variable. Cost of living generally affects this element. I mean, it does affect things like electricity bills and things like that, but these are the areas really that it's affected by stealth, because you don't necessarily have fixed bills for these things. So food and groceries, purchases, clothes, all of that, takeaways, holidays, medical costs, all of the things that might be different month to month. And so the way that we've done it is that we've, I've spent kind of a bit of time going through an annual process to work out what the monthly kind of average is. Astra's totally cool with letting me do that because I enjoy it. And then we plug the numbers in here, and then it helps us for the year ahead to work out a few bits and bobs along the way. So that's the next bit, and then the final bit at the bottom is I've kind of got transfer from savings, transfer to savings. So the way that we do this, and again you can do this in a different way, but the way that we do it is that, I mean, in this particular example, you can see that if you stick to this budget, the bottom column will show you that you've got £110 at the end of every month if you stick to your budget, that you could then pop into your savings account, or you could do whatever you wanted with that. Over the course of the year, that equates to £1,320. Now, of course, life doesn't work like this spreadsheet, and so in terms of the variable expenses, some of the things to pull out have been quite complex in our own position. So that's why I created this bit on the right, which I just wanted to. You probably can't see this in huge detail, but this is the monitoring aspect of the spreadsheet here. So the way this works, I'll just read it out for those that can't see or are tuning in online. The top right yellow box is your kind of completed months. So in this particular one, there's a 3 in there because what I've done is, in this example, I've filled in January, February and March tabs. So I've put in what we actually spent. Now, for some people, you've got banks, building societies, whatever, they've got cool apps that do most of that for you. We don't have that, and so I kind of go through that process more manually, which does take a bit of time. But what it means is that I can plug in the actual numbers for each of those in the January, February, March, etc. Once I've finished each tab, I can change that number, and then this kind of white section here basically tells me how we're doing against budget. So if I just pick a few of these things out, what you should find is that if you've got a salaried income, the number's the same because you know what you're going to get. If you're at the top bit of the spreadsheet, the fixed expenses are generally the same because your mortgage is the same if you're on a fixed rate to mortgage, or your rent, or whatever it cost might be. But it's this variable bit that will change. So in this particular example, what you can see, I'll just read a few of these out. The top one at the red, £466, for example, in terms of food and groceries, is the monthly average over that 3-month period. And you can, if you look at the yellow equivalent, we'd set a budget of, say, £400. So that straight away tells us that we either got the budget wrong, or maybe we're shopping a little bit too much in more expensive places, or maybe we need to think about reducing certain types of things that we're getting in terms of that particular column, or row rather. And conversely, if you look at some of the green ones, in terms of holidays and getaways there, you know, for example, if you'd set a budget of 200 across the month, each month, obviously that would be zero most of the time, but then if you're spending 2,400 on a holiday or whatever, you can see that you're doing better in that one there, where it's showing green is only 100. Only disclaimer I'd make about this is that, of course, things like that holiday one are all going to be slightly off if you spend them as one big kind of flight purchase or holiday. But the vast majority of these are quite accurate. And personal things just to kind of bring out, which we found really helpful. We did this process, and it turned out that we were spending way too much on eating out. That was me going to prep lunches instead of making my own sandwiches. It was going to a restaurant and ordering kind of more luxuriously than actually we realised we could afford at the particular point we were in. So this spreadsheet helped us identify that really quickly. So when Alistair went on maternity leave and her income plummeted, it was very obvious where we could kind of make changes rather than having to kind of look at cutting giving or kind of remortgaging or panicking about anything like that, because we were like, actually, we can just get a few less takeaway coffees. Things like purchases, you know, the £3, £4, £5 little eBay, PayPal purchases that you don't notice, they add up big time, and they you know, the spreadsheet highlights those kind of things quite well. And then the other one is cash withdrawals. I could not believe this when I started this process years ago. I think probably when we were kind of early days marriage, we were withdrawing something like £300 a month in cash. And I was like, what's going on? And obviously life's changed, and you know, cash is not as much thing. But unless you keep itemised receipts, that cash disappears. We don't know where that's gone, so we couldn't know how we could change our approach to budgeting, where we could make savings, because it had disappeared. So we set ourselves a budget in this particular case, for example, of a much lower amount, which would be for things where you need to pay in cash at in certain contexts to keep that keep that to a minimum so that you know exactly where your spending is going. The other thing I would say on cash is, for those that might be very new to this or struggling with finances, is that the Cap and Money course is definitely worth checking out. And I believe, certainly when I've done it in the past, it was based around cash, and that's at the other end of the spectrum really, is in order to, for people that might want to make sure that they're on top of their money. It's a very tangible thing, and so cash, I'm not saying that cash is bad, but in terms of your finances, it's important to know where you're at. So I think that's just a helpful thing. So do check out the Cap Money course if that's needed. So we're ready for the first bit of discussion now. So what we'd love to do, following on from that mentee moment, is have a look at this question in maybe groups of 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes. How do you find the process of budgeting? And then a couple of kind of sub-questions to kind of get you going. Are you able to monitor your income and expenditure? Is that something that you do? Is this all completely new to you? What areas could you improve on? So we'll give it 5 minutes, get into small groups, we'll cut the recording, and then we'll come back and move on to the next bit.
So hopefully you found that discussion useful on your budgets. At the end, if there's time, we'll be happy to go into a bit more detail if you want. So for this section, we're going to be looking at savings and pensions. So why save? Why save? Can anyone think of a good reason to save? Just shout out if you've got.
Emergencies.
Yep. What did you say? Fun stuff, yeah, 100%. Anything else?
Big purchases.
Big purchases, exactly. Actually, that's a good one because, and I think in the last session I shared, Rich and I, in our 20s, we got married mid-20s, and for both of us, we struggled to save, but part of the fundamental reason we struggled is because we thought that putting money away, we were somehow, I don't know, being greedy, or we weren't trusting God. But actually, one of the things that helped me click in my mind was speaking to another Christian in Rev a few years ago. She's like, why save? And she's like, well, just practically, some things that you buy, it's going to be more than a week's work, it's going to be more than a month's work, so you need to save for it, otherwise you'll go into debt. And I just thought, oh my word, yeah, that completely makes sense. And that really was part of our journey into actually getting into the habit of saving and understanding why we were doing it. So, it's a good discipline to save. So it's a good discipline not to spend 100% of what is coming in, if possible. We looked at the budgeting spreadsheet, that 20%, can you put that into something for your future? It's it's thinking about your future with the pay that's coming in. It helps you not to rely on debt for things like emergencies, as was mentioned, or credit cards for things like holidays and fun stuff, which we all like to do as well. But having something that you've set aside just enables you to do that in a way that doesn't get you into more debt. And it's a biblical principle. So if it's something that the Bible's encouraged, it's definitely worth us looking at it. So, automating savings. I think this is the key, really, to being a really good saver, unless you're like James, who just seems to do it naturally. But for me, it was definitely automating savings. What do I mean like that? I mean taking the thinking out of remembering to do it, because for us, it was sort of last on the agenda. We'd pay all the essentials, we'd do all our fun stuff. It's like, oh, what have we got left? Not much. So we've kind of turned that on its head a bit. So when we get paid, it's like, actually, we've got a standing order now, or a direct debit that just goes out. So it's like, okay, we have fun stuff for everything that's left, if you see what I mean. So automating it is really taking that kind of element of being tempted to spend everything, and it's actually it just removes it from the cash that you have available that week or that month. And you can start off really small. So, when I started getting into the habit of saving, honestly, it was like £30 at a time. But because it was a standing order and I just sort of set it and forget it, over a year, over 2 years, it actually built up. And I was really surprised at how it can build up when you're just intentional and you leave it there. So even if you don't have a lot, start with something. A lot of savings accounts, you can start with £10, £25. It doesn't have to be huge amounts of money, which I think sometimes is a barrier to us saving anything at all. I like to think of savings in sort of, short term, medium term, long term, because sometimes I think when you build up a pot of money, it's actually quite tempting just to dip into it for, I don't know, an extra cinema trip or whatever. But actually, if you have a purpose for each of the pots that you have, I think it just makes sure that you're able to fulfil the goals that you have. So for short terms, things like bills, you might have a bill that comes 6 monthly or annually. It's like, how do you pay for that in one go when you've only got sort of a month's salary to work on? So maybe you want to sort of divide that annual number by the number of weeks in a year. So you have a little amount, save it up, so by the time that bill comes, you've got it in your short-term pot to be able to pay that. Medium-term savings, I kind of use that for holidays, so that might be something that you guys find useful. Just to think, I'd like to go away with friends for in the summer or something. It's like, okay, maybe start to thinking about that, like the autumn before or something, and put a monthly or weekly amount away so that you can do that. And then long-term, really that's sort of dream goal stuff, which is really important, but I think with the day-to-day, sometimes we get lost in those big kind of goals that we have. So whether that's, I don't know, it's not very environmentally friendly to say this, but it's buying a car maybe, or a deposit for your flat, or a deposit for a house. That might take you a few years to do. It certainly took Rich and I a number of years to do that. But again, it's that intentional, there's a pot there, we're going to try our best not to touch that for 5 years, let's say. And then, hopefully have some family that might be able to help with that as well. Someone mentioned emergency funds. I think this is a really important one. One that hit home a few years ago when, our washing machine broke down, and for the first time we had actually saved emergency funds. And we were like, oh my goodness, we can just pay for this new washing machine that we really need with 2 kids. I don't know the amount to suggest. Some people say try and get 6 months worth of expenditure saved for that fund. Some people say 3, some people say 1. I think you just need to decide what it is that how much you want to save for an emergency, and maybe what sort of emergency you would have that pot for. Because again, I think there's a temptation to just dip in it if it's there, and not live sort of intentionally with large sums of money in your account. So let's have a look at the different types of savings accounts. So easy access savings accounts are really good for sort of short-term and medium-term bills and goals that you have. The only problem with that is the interest rates aren't great. So in terms of inflation, which we know at the moment is really high, so inflation is that rise in the cost of living. So traditionally it's been about 3%. And at the moment, inflation is you're looking at 8 to 10%. So we're all feeling that. There's a big jump that we've had in the last year. Savings accounts, traditionally over the last few years, you've literally been getting 1%. So not great, which is why, to be honest, that's one of the reasons why I started investing a few years ago, because I was just like, this is actually not, you're not even making anything when you're putting it in an account. But for easy access savings account, it's good if you need to pay a bill or something like that. So you're not going to get a good interest rate, but it does mean it's accessible if you need it for your bills, and then you're not going to get stuck having it fixed somewhere that you can't actually get out without penalty. The other thing to note about that, what do I want to say about that? Yeah, with easy access savings account, there might be a limit on how much you can put in each month as well. So again, that could be a drawback. Sometimes it's £150 a month, £400, but again, you just have to check what the different conditions are. You get fixed rate savings accounts as well. For me, that's if you're able to sort of keep something away a bit longer, you will get a higher interest rate for doing that. So as long as you don't need to access that account within a month or 2, and you can afford to put it away, say, for 6 months or a year, I would definitely recommend a fixed rate savings account or a bond. But it does mean it's kind of locked away, and if you want to get it out, you're going to get a penalty. So it's just thinking about how quickly you need to access things, how long can you keep it away. But I think they're really good. We've only just been able to start doing that because, to be honest, just living day to day with 2 children, we've often needed to dip into our savings to pay for things. But after a few years of being able to do that, you get into a rhythm where perhaps you can put away a little bit more for a bit longer. And at the moment, you're getting interest rates 5%, 6%, 7%. So it can be really worth it. Obviously, it's not matching inflation, so the cost of your pound today is worth less than it was last year. So, you know, your pound last year is probably worth maybe 90p now. So if you don't let your money work for you with interest rates over the years, the value of what you have is actually going down, which is why interest rates, it's really important to actually be aware of it. So about automating savings, just a bit more on that. So setting up a standing order or direct debit, something like that is really key. Calculating how much you need. So you kind of need to know roughly how much do you want to spend on each item in order to sort of understand how to break that down and save for it, which is where the budgeting is really important to start with that first. And I think if you have any pay increases, which we sometimes do, it's also making a plan for, okay, not having lifestyle creep, and maybe actually what can you do with that increase in your income? Can you save it, or maybe God's calling you to give some away? But I guess what we're encouraging is just to be intentional with your thinking about what's coming in. Ideally, I think if you have got pay increase, just have a think about actually maintaining the same lifestyle and doing something purposeful with that increase. I don't know if people have heard the term lifestyle creep. Anyone? No? So I came across this a few years ago as well, and oh goodness, I was like, oh yeah, I do that. So it's basically when you get an increase, suddenly everything else is increased as well. So it actually feels like you have no more money because you start buying organic, you start getting better beauty products, you start going to the hairdressers a bit more, and before you know it, you don't have any more money than you did before, even though you've had a pay increase. So that's the lifestyle creep that, you know, we can all be affected by if we're not intentional and actually asking God, okay, thank you, you've blessed us with this increase, what should we do with it? And lastly, I wanted to talk about, one more thing. Some of us will be blessed enough to have people in our lives to give you a physical inheritance. We spoke last time about the importance of a spiritual inheritance. Thank God that's what my parents gave to me. I really didn't have much money from them at all, and not necessarily expecting to, but they did give me a rich spiritual inheritance, which, to be honest with you, is more important than anything else. But some of us will also be blessed with receiving money from grandparents or parents. And it's also being intentional about, okay, if you get a lump sum or if you're helped by your family, what do you do with that? Not just whittling it away, but actually thinking about, I want to be really purposeful with what I've been given. So yeah, that's probably one for the future because a lot of us are quite young. So just have that in mind. If someone is, just generous enough to leave you something, have a think, bring it to God first. God, what would you like me to do with it? Just being really intentional. Lastly, pensions. We've got a mentee moment. Which, can you do that? Because I don't ask to do that. So we're going to look at how many of us have a self-invested pension plan. So it would be good just to get an idea of that. So we've got a new code on the screen. So if you go to mentor.com again and just type in the code 43976260. Do you have a workplace or personal pension? that's great to see. A lot of us do have, a lot of us do have pensions. When I started working, pensions were not mandatory. So people could opt out, and I didn't really understand why would you opt out of your company paying for your future. But I think a lot of it is people just didn't understand what it was. So you would get some people opting out of pensions, whereas I think at the moment it's mandatory. It's got to be 8%. Is it not?
It's auto-enrollment.
Auto-enrollment, which it might, well, I'm in my day, but it really wasn't like that before. So that's actually really positive, because what it means is your company, if you were working in a salaried position, your company will provide you with a pension. I think if they, at the moment, I think if they put in 3%, you do 5%, or you negotiate it. So that's really important. Basically, a pension is deferred payment. You are saying, I'm working now, but I'm deferring some of this money that I'm getting now, I'm deferring it for my future, for when I may not be able to work, or when I want to stop working. So you are really looking at 30 years ahead, which I think maybe is why some people struggle, because it's so far away. You know, you think you could put it off, which many of us do, but I would really like to encourage you all to think about that if you haven't got some who don't. And I don't know if that's maybe you're a student or self-employed. I think it's one of those sort of admin things if you're self-employed to try and set one up for yourself. So you can do SIPs, which is a self-invested pension fund, if you are self-employed. I'd really encourage you to do this. And again, you can set an amount that's affordable, manageable for you. There's a lot to say on this, but I think you can look at pension calculators online, which I encourage you to do, because what that will do then is you think about maybe when you want to retire or when you want to stop working, which is over 55. And then you think about how much you think you might need. So, you know, it's not easy, but you have to think about, okay, what am I earning now to have roughly the same lifestyle? What do I need in the future? And there are calculators that will help you do that. But that's probably the best place to start. Sorry, I keep forgetting my slides, don't I? Thank you. So I would, this is a really good graph. So a great thing about pensions is that the government will basically top it up. It's tax-free. So again, this is just quite a powerful way to grow your money as well. So if you look at this, if you're a basic rate taxpayer, your tax relief on that is 20%, and if you're a higher rate, it goes up proportionally. But that can make a really big difference if you've got something sitting in an investment account for 30 years. You're going to really see that difference in terms of the top-up that you get from the tax relief. Thank you. And this is, okay, so if you've contributed an amount, a monthly amount, let's say, this is the investment growth that happens, because pension funds are invested in different companies. They're also diversified across different asset classes, so like property, companies, stocks, bonds. That purple line there is the growth. So you've put in this amount there with the orange, and the purple line is the growth that is happening just by leaving it in the investment account. And I've seen this personally in looking at my pension fund, which I really wasn't aware of until I got to my mid-30s, and I thought, oh, I better think about this. I go into the account, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's grown, and I've just put in a set amount each month, but actually the growth from just being invested in different companies and things like that has meant that the pension pot's gone, it's grown. So after this, I'm just really hoping all of you will set one up. I think it's really worth it. Obviously there's risks as well, so you need to read about it, but the way you set it up is you set your risk tolerance. So if you're younger, you do more riskier investments, and then as you get older, what happens is your pension fund will gradually reduce that risk, because you're not going to have another 30 years for the market to grow again. If you want to go through this with me in a bit more detail, I'll be really, really happy to talk about it. For me, I'm just quite passionate about this because I wish somebody spoke to me about this in my 20s. But for me, I just found the whole thing confusing and I didn't really want to engage. It's not that hard. I mean, it is complicated, but to get the basic principles to get this going is not hard. So it's really important that we demystify this. So if you're in your 20s, early 30s, please start now, because you can start with a smaller amount, whereas if you wait until you're sort of late 30s, 40s, 50s, you're going to be trying to chuck away, you know, quite huge sums to catch up for the point that you didn't contribute. And I think that's all I'm going to say on that.
Amazing.
Okay.
Thanks, team. How are people feeling? Do you want a 2-minute break? Everybody need the toilet or anything like that? Take 2 minutes, or do you want to kind of go straight into the next bit? Yeah? Let's go straight.
Yeah.
Cool. If you need to talk, you're all right. Oh, all right. If you want to gather back, we'll kick off part 2. Right, welcome back, folks. Part 2 of Chapter 2. We're going to look at investing. First of all, in what we call the stock market. We'll unpack that a little bit. Then we're going to have a look at investing in business. I'm delighted we've got Andy sharing a little bit. Big Tanika's going to have a look a bit about property later on, and finally in the kingdom, and then we'll look at the last bit is financial administration. Got a quote here from Warren Buffett, who is, well, I mean, he's one of the richest guys in the world, very well-known investor. One of his quotes here is defining investing as foregoing consumption now in order to have the ability to consume more at a later date. Now, I don't like that much, because even though it's true, and we'll see a little bit about that, why it focuses on consumption. And as we talked about at the very, very beginning, this is all about the heart. So I've got a slightly revised version, which hopefully may appear on a t-shirt one day, which is to forego consumption now in order to be a greater blessing later. So the idea is that you will be able to do more with your money, but it's the same principle. So just kind of keep that in mind, because it is very much about the heart. A lot of people look at this kind of stock shares, funds, indexes and all that, and kind of all kind of feel a little bit overwhelming, so we're going to kind of unpack a little bit of that now. So what is investing? I mean, investing effectively is the act of committing money or capital to an endeavour with the expectation of obtaining additional income or profit. So that's effectively what it is. It can be in many different ways. I thought it'd be helpful to kind of just do a little glossary of terms for those that might be very, very new to this, just so that when I'm speaking, some of the things that I'm talking about, you know what they are. So when we say shares, a share effectively is, think of it as a unit of ownership in, for example, a company. So you could have shares in Apple, or you could have shares in whatever company. If you buy shares in a company, you're buying stock in that company. That's where the term stock market comes from. There's two types of share, two main types of share. One is private, and the other is public. Public companies only can issue shares, and they do so via a stock exchange. You might have heard of, for example, the London Stock Exchange. So buying a share or buying stock in a company such as Apple or Amazon or whatever else is an example of a public one. Private one would be, for example, one of the things that Astra and I have done is we bought shares in an unlisted company with the hope that if that company takes off in the future, we will see a return on our investment, but that is not available to anybody kind of in the general public. That's available to people that are involved in some way with that company. That could be because your friend or family member is running that company, or it could be that they are doing some crowdfunding. Lots of different ways to get involved, but they're not publicly listed shares. Those are their private ones. Commodity is anything that comes from the earth. So a commodity could be gold, could be wheat, grain, silver, lots of things like that. So that's what we're saying for commodities: oil, gas. And then a bond is an IOU from the issuer of the bond, which could be a government, for example, that promises to pay an investor a specific amount. Bonds are generally quite safe because, like savings accounts, it's a fixed rate. So the bond could say this is a 2% bond. We're going to raise money for whatever purpose, and we are going to pay our investors back 2%. The risk is low because you know you're going to get your money back plus the 2%. But the risk comes that you don't know what's going to happen with things like inflation or whatever else. So that 2% might not be worth as much as if you put it in a bank account that had a 4% savings. So that's where the risk comes in. And then finally, in terms of a fund is a portfolio of stocks, shares, commodities, etc. that help investors to diversify their investments, which we'll have a look at a little bit later on. And then how do you generate an income from all of this? I mean, there are two main ways. One is cashing in. So, for example, is a little bit of a testimony. I bought shares in Zoom at the beginning of the pandemic because I figured that it was a good idea. I'll rephrase that. I bought a share in Zoom. So it was a great return on investment, but it was a single share, so it didn't generate very much money. But that was an example of where I cashed in on something that I assumed would have an impact at a particular point because of the circumstances of the world that we live in. The other area is dividends. So a dividend payment, for example, a company might issue a dividend payment from its profits, and so if you've got shares in a company, that company posts very good profits, they might decide to pay their shareholders a dividend payment. So if you've got a substantial portfolio in terms of your investments, dividends can represent, in the long term, quite a stable additional income for many people. What I thought would be helpful is to bust a few myths about investing, because, I mean, let's be honest, investing, I think, has certainly, I guess, within the context of the last 20 years that we've experienced, most of us in this room, it potentially has got a bad reputation because of things like the financial crash and profiteering that's been going on as a result of things like the pandemic and everything else. But I thought it'd be helpful to kind of work out what's a myth and what's not. So I've got three here. So the first is I don't have enough money to start investing. The second is you need to be an expert to be an investor. And then the third is it's too risky, or it's like gambling. So I'm going to have a look at these one at a time. First, I don't have enough money to start investing. So as I was kind of like looking at this, I came across this this piece of research, which was looking at asking a whole range of questions. One of them was how much money do people in the UK think that they need to start investing? Anybody got an idea? What was the average? Feel free to shout out.
100?
£100? 100,000?
Oh, pounds.
£100. Any takers on?
Something in the thousands, like
20,000. Yeah, I reckon it's more like 50,000.
50,000.
I think the question is
Yeah, so we've got £100 to 50,000. So you can see already we've got quite a spread in terms of what people might think. I'm not saying that's what you think, but that demonstrates. Look at this graph. It's an absolute corker. The average at the top kind of middle is 41.3 thousand. So the average person in the UK thought that that's what you needed in order to start investing. Slight difference between men and women, and then at the bottom, different age ranges. And what you can see, generally speaking, the younger you are, the more you think you need. That's quite an interesting stat. And then just to kind of have a look at that in a different way, geographically that changes, and look at London. It's very, very dark red. The average there is just under £80,000.
Can I just ask a question?
Question, yeah.
Is this a dish? Is this salary? What you think salary you need, or what you think additional
What
money
you
you
would-
have to spend?
Good question. So for those on camera listening in, the question is this salary, or is this what you would need to invest? The answer is the latter. So this is so people think you would need to have £80,000 spare to be able to start investing. And even if it is salary, it's still complete nonsense. So what I thought would be helpful is to kind of just look at a few scenarios. I'm going to try and get over it quite quickly because I'm conscious of time. One of the things that Astrid and I did, we use an organisation or a company, an app called Wealthify, which is
Can I just say, it's really funny that when you cross from London to the east, it's dramatically wrong. Like, what happens on the border?
If you live on the border, you're right. So I'm not going to go through these in huge detail. I'll go through this first one and then just kind of just to kind of give you a flavour. This is Wealthify. This is what we use in terms of our own kind of stock. This is called a stocks and shares ISA. So it's not me or Alistair picking Apple and Amazon and all that kind of stuff. This is we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is a managed portfolio. You can start with an initial investment of £100 and you can put in £20 a month to this. You choose your investment style from cautious right the way through to adventurous. Cautious, we'll have a look at it a little bit more detail. That's less risk, so whatever you choose there will impact the makeup of your portfolio that the fund manager does on your behalf. And you can see that from this, in that big kind of diamond on the right hand side, if you over a 10-year period start with £100 and put 20 quid a month in, you'll have invested a total of £2,500 over that 10-year period, and generally speaking, your projected value would be just under £3,000. So you'll have made just under £500 growth on your investment. Obviously, there's a thing for if the market performs worse, what it would be. You can see it's marginally lower than what you put in, and then obviously there's a high number at the top right, which is higher if the market performs better. So that's a modest investment, a medium investment style, and that's over 10 years. So let's just have a quick look at what happens if you do exactly the same thing, but you do it for 15 years. And you can see that the big old diamond shape, you've made over £1,000 growth just by that extra 5 years. So what does that tell you? Nothing else has changed, but time has made a significant impact. So then we'll have a look at what happens if you change your style and you go to ambitious instead of kind of down the middle. You put a slightly bigger amount in at the beginning, and then you have a slightly bigger amount during over the course of a month. Over an 18-year period. So just to be really open about it, this is actually what we do for our kids. We've got stocks and shares ISA. We put £500 in at the beginning, and we've committed to putting in £50 a month over an 18-year period. We can't take this out. This is slightly different from a stocks and shares ISA where you can pull your money at any time. But over that period of time, we would have invested in relatively small amounts, over £11,000. But that is going to generate realistically over £5,000 growth just on that investment. And if the market performs better, you can see it goes up to 24,000, I mean, more than double. So that's just an example of the different ways that you can engage with something like Wealthify. And then the last one here, you can see that numbers get very kind of significantly bigger the more you put in, and particularly the more you put in each month. I think it's important to say that you can start with £1 initial investment or £100 or £1,000. The key thing here is actually the monthly investment. That's where it's called pound cost averaging, which is where you're riding the bumps in the market by putting in regular amounts rather than putting everything in. And I was thinking of a way to demonstrate this, or kind of illustrate this. If you went into a supermarket and said, I'm going to buy 365 sandwiches, so I've got a year's worth of sandwiches, you'd have your 365 sandwiches and you'd have your sandwich for every day of the year, but you'd miss out on all the deals. So you'd pay probably considerably more than if you went in every day and had a look in the reduced section. That's the best I could think in terms of pound cost averaging. So that's number one. Number two is that you need to be an expert in order to invest. And I think just to highlight here that, so as we've seen with the stocks and shares ISA, we're not picking any of those funds. That's done by fund managers. It's done by what's in this particular case called robo-investing. So it's a combination of, not robots, but a combination of fund managers and algorithms that look at trends and market performance and all of that kind of stuff. And they're doing it on the behalf of the investor. You can control the level of risk. So if you want to be more cautious, that's absolutely fine. And you can make withdrawals at any time. So if you suddenly need that big purchase and you didn't have the savings, but you've been putting this into a plan, you can make that as long as that's not a junior ISA for children. And then the final one is it's too risky or it's like gambling. This is a really interesting one because actually if anybody here has a pension, this is exactly the same principle as having a pension. The only difference is that you're taking a more active role in it yourself. The principle is exactly the same. Money is being invested on your behalf in order to grow. Everything that is in here is in your pension. So the first thing is talking about a balanced portfolio, and so Pete, if you could come up to the front, I need a bit of hand here. You might have been wondering, and apologies to those tuning in, you probably can't see the stuff on this table, but I've got a whole range of goodies on the table here, and I was wanting to kind of, Pete is going to be my assistant in highlighting a few things. So what we've got is, if you turn the fan on, there's a little button. Does anybody know what this table represents?
Life.
Life? What was that?
Things you can invest in.
Things you can invest in.
You're too quick.
Sorry.
Yeah, so, yeah, essentially this...
represents things.
What is it? No? Was that groceries?
No, that represents the company Apple. The fan represents wind energy, clean energy. The bag of sugar, commodities. Agriculture, we've got housing, we've got some cash. Safe investment tends to be something like US dollars, which is generally quite stable. At the end I've got Raf's little Hey Dougie mobile phone, that represents fintech. Space, travel, etc, etc, lots of things. What this represents is a balanced portfolio. And just to kind of challenge the thought around it's too risky, it's gambling, the reality is that if you had £1,000 and you said I'm going to put this £1,000 into Apple, or I'm going to put it into the bag of sugar, the price of sugar, that's not balanced, that is high risk, because if those prices go down significantly, your investment can go down quite significantly as well. But if you imagine that you've got a balanced portfolio that's got loads more stuff like this, and this is what a fund manager does. You're investing in hundreds of companies and commodities and stocks and shares and all that kind of stuff. If Apple has a bit of a dodgy period, their profits go down, something political happens and somebody gets in trouble or whatever else, it doesn't matter as much for your portfolio because that's one tiny part of a much bigger picture that you're invested in. Where this does potentially go wrong, where the risk comes in, and I was going to do the whole kind of throwing, but I won't do that, is if you had something like the crash of 2008 or the pandemic, where actually everything goes down, and that's where the risk is, but those things will look are not all to be feared as well. Just the last one there, the cologne, the black thing there, personal favourite. What does it say on the front? What does this represent?
Is it? 007.
007, it represents bonds. So just to, thanks Pete, round of applause. So just to kind of illustrate in terms of, so that we've talked about balanced portfolio, but the long-term approach is really important. This quote from rocketmoney.com shows what the average stock market returns are. And what's really interesting about this is that all of these, with the exception of the top 10 years, they all cover major financial catastrophes, including the pandemic, and with the exception of the top one, the crash of 2008. And you can see that the average stock market return, this is based on if you'd invested in the S&P 500 in those period of time, are still very, very much better than you get anywhere near putting in a bank account. So I wanted to kind of draw attention to that, and then another way to look at it is that actually this shows that kind of the approach against looking at savings. So this one is if you'd invested in the FTSE 100, which is the kind of 100 biggest companies in the UK stock exchange. You can see that you've got ups and downs, but it's heading in an upwards direction over time, and it's significantly better performance than the red line, which represents steady savings account. And what I like about this is that if you look at, for example, 2020, there's a massive drop. And obviously pandemic and all of that, and this is the temptation where you look and go, I've just lost loads of money in my portfolio because look at the graph, it's gone down, I've gone from under 1,400 to only just over 1,150, and you can kind of panic about it. But actually, if your money had been safe in a bank account, you still wouldn't be anywhere near that. So this is why the long-term approach is important. important, as opposed to day trading, which is not something that we're talking about here, that we wouldn't encourage as a helpful strategy. And then finally, Tanika, you mentioned this just in terms of about investing when you were, you'd looked at had this advice when you were in your 20s. This graph is like really helpful. This is from an American source, and it says Jack invests 200 per month, starting at 25. Jill, when she's not falling down a hill, invests 200 at 35, and then Joey at 45. And you can see there that actually this demonstrates that investing early is really, really helpful. So if there are people here who are thinking, you know what, I feel like I've got enough to be able to make even small contributions into a savings account or stocks and shares or whatever else, this is the kind of trajectory that you can get rather than delaying it. Because time really is the helpful thing here, because it helps ride out all of those storms that do come. And then I think finally on this particular section is just looking at what does it mean to get started in investing. I think first and foremost, take your plans for investing to God, just as you would with anything. If you were thinking about change of career or new job or family changes or whatever it might be, taking your investment plans to God is exactly the same approach. Ask God, what do you want me to do in terms of my finances? I think that's a really important first step. And some practical things here. Determining your level of risk or your tolerance to risk is important. Your investment style. Are you cautious? Would you prefer to have something that you know is not going to make as much in terms of the returns, but it's going to be generally safer? Because, for example, you've got a heavier weighting in things like cash as opposed to shares, and shares tend to be riskier. Decide on what your investment goals are. Rather than just saying, I'm going to put a load of money away so that I can have loads of money in the future for my retirement. Think about what you want to do with that, because that actually is a really important part of it. For us personally, our investment goals are in order to be able to generate an additional income so that we have, in the long term, less of a reliance on salaried positions, so that we can do more of the stuff that we love doing without creating financial challenges for ourselves or our family. We want to be able to provide things like house deposits for our family. There's a group of people at Rev that talk about money quite regularly, and we'd love to be able to bless other people in the church particularly. People that, in terms of getting people onto the housing ladders, people to be able to stay in London where prices are going up, all of that kind of stuff are things that are really important to think about in terms of why you want to invest. And I think that one at the bottom there, investing regularly over time, just to repeat, that's very helpful rather than thinking I'm just going to put a lump sum away and then leave it. Regular investing is a much better way to approach it. And so in terms of the questions for discussion, so we'll give this another 5 minutes. Are you even interested in any of this? For those that said, no, I don't invest last time that we're here, is it something that you are invested in? If so, why? If so, why not? How can you go about learning more and developing habits to save, to invest even a small amount, just as you might do with saving? And then maybe chat a little bit about what is your risk tolerance. Are you somebody that thinks I'll be more cautious with this, or is it something that you feel that a more optimistic or adventurous, I think was the term, approach is something that you'd be interested in? So again, same groups, and then we'll give you 5 minutes, and then we'll come back to the next session. I've actually made a really good point in terms of investing in things like stock market and all of that. If you do cash in at any point, there is tax to pay. So it's not income tax, it's capital gains tax, but that's something that is different from pension. So thank you for raising that. Next up, we are going to welcome Andy, who's going to talk a little bit about some stuff that he's working on in terms of new business. Andy, over to you.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Andy. I think most people know who I am. If you don't, kind of a big deal around here. I'm not, please. So James has really kindly asked me to share a bit about investment and specifically around running businesses. The last 6-7 years, I've run a few businesses. Right now, I'm running 3. I know it sounds crazy. I'm a freelance graphic designer, so do that job. I then partnered with a few other friends to set up a studio where we specialise in branding and campaigns. And then just this month, I've launched a game, a trading card game called Mega, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. It's quite hard to fit all of my experience in 5 minutes, so I'm going to focus on like one particular aspect, and then if you're interested, just come and grab me later on, and I'm happy to talk for days on this sort of thing. Just like James and Tanique, I'm really passionate about business and Christians running businesses. I actually think we need more Christians running businesses. I think it's really important to have people of stature, people of, who are good people, who run and influence how society runs. So one area that kind of motivates me to run a business is the idea of the parable of talents, the stories from that, the lessons that we learn from that we can create streams of blessings. And one of the things I'm really encouraged by that story is how the two who were given and took responsibility for it were able to produce more based off what they were originally given. And that's kind of my vision for running businesses, is that I'd like to create an opportunity to bless others as I have been blessed. So I know I'm really good at creative stuff and I'm a big visionary, and by pairing that with a business plan, I can create more opportunities for other people and also the opportunity to bless people. And this is kind of where Mega was born out of. Other two businesses have similar reasons, but Mega was kind of born out of this idea that as a kid I was growing up, as we all have grown up, we loved our toys and our cartoon shows and the things that we enjoyed playing with. And one thing I noticed as a kid was that there wasn't a lot of characters on screen or in my hands that looked like me. So I built this concept around a game about challenging the idea of who is a champion, who is a hero in the eyes of kids, and can kids see themselves more in the products that they use. Another reason is that, obviously I believe that God has gifted us all with gifts and that we should use them well and we should execute them really well. And I think that glorifies God when we make good work. And so I wanted to produce a product that was excellent in use and that people would appreciate from its quality, and that through that would glorify God, but also create an opportunity for young kids to kind of create new memories, both with their family and their friends, that they can have fun and feel represented. So what I did, what I have done over the last 4 years is worked on this game. It has involved a lot of time and energy and resources of my own. I've sacrificed a lot of late nights and a whole plethora of other things to be able to produce this and build it from scratch. One of the things I often talk to my wife Rima about when it comes to investing is this idea of everyone has their own unique currency. So we all have money in the account and we all have our basic ideas of how we use our resources, but we all also individually have some idea of what matters most to us. So for my wife Rima, she loves to buy really good quality clothes. So she'll save up her money and be able to buy something that she knows will last long and she feels good in. For me, my currency is making things. So I will gladly wear the same underwear for 4 years if I can make a game like this. And that's my currency. And I think that the great thing about investing is that we can recognise what God's given us and what's on our heart and be able to pour into that to be able to bless others. I'm not sure what else to say. Is that cool?
Do you need investors?
Yes. I'm not really here to plug the game, as we say, but if you are interested, I would massively appreciate people's support. Up until 2 days ago, I had full funding for this game, and sadly an investor pulled out, which has kind of put me in a bit of a predicament now. So I've got about 6 days to kind of raise full investment. So I am looking for people to help out, so if you wanted to help out, that would be a massive blessing. But yeah, as always happy here, always happy to chat, talk more about business, and yeah.
Thanks for listening. Just to say, it's a great example of investing in the kingdom as well. You know, Tanika's going to be covering that a little bit more, but please do speak to Andy, check it out. It's on Kickstarter, 6 days to go, and this is a great example of investing in something that I think will have an eternal consequence. So this isn't an example of something that you're investing in specifically to get a financial return. This is an example of something that you're investing in to champion and support a new business, and what better way to kind of partner with one of our dear friends. So thanks, Andy. We're going to skip over that part and move straight into property.
Okay. Thank you. This is probably my favourite subject. Yes, please. I don't know why I can't figure out how to do these slides at the same time. But property. So this is one of Rich and I's favourite things to talk about. I think I mentioned in the last session that we became accidental landlords because we couldn't sell our flat. But actually, I work in property for my job, so it is quite a natural kind of thing to do for me. But what it has meant is that we have got rent coming in, and when I was on maternity leave, it was actually quite a useful way to help with income when my salary position decreased quite a lot, particularly with my second child. Proverbs 31, a virtuous woman, it says she buys a field and sells it. So it's a good thing to do. So I figured it'd be good to talk about. As we know in London, it's just very expensive. And I remember being, when we first came, we were just like, oh, this is never going to happen. But this is where you mix faith and the practical saving as well, because God really came through for us in the sense of our housing. In terms of a sort of investment strategy, it's good for rental income, as I mentioned, but it's good for capital growth. So if you've bought, at a certain level, hopefully you've gotten a good price for your property. Over time, the value of that property is very likely to go up. If you've done your research, and as we know in London, it is just going up. It's part of that diversification strategy, which James is talking about. If you look at that table, you've got a little property there. It's just part of the pots of investments that you can have, so that's also good. And I think, for the most part, it's easy to understand. It's physical, it's tangible, you can see what you're buying, and in some respects it can be a bit easier to understand than maybe stocks and shares, where you don't really know all the funds that are being invested in. In terms of some of the disadvantages or the difficulties with property, it's very expensive. So we all know, you need a large deposit in the city to be able to buy. I think many people in the church have been able to do shared ownership, so that's been quite useful to get people on the property ladder, because you don't buy 100% of it, but you're able to get a share of it. So that's been brilliant, and we've seen people over time just increase the share that they own, so that's worked really well. Yes, what else is there? Stamp duty, also very expensive. Again, that's a tax that you have to pay in order to buy property, so that could be a bit tricky. And also it's illiquid, so that means trying to get your cash out once you've bought a property can be quite hard. I think the average time to sell a property might be 12 weeks, but often it's longer. So if you need your cash quickly, you just have to think about with property, it will take longer to get your cash out if you need to sell. Property doesn't always rise. You have the rises and falls, and you have to ride that out, which is why it's always important, that starting price that you pay, always try and get a good price on that, preferably. So what happened with Rich and I, the time that we were ready to buy was 2010. So you had the 2008 crash that happened. 2 years later, it actually dipped quite low, and it just happened again, I think miraculously. That was the point that we had enough to actually pay for a flat. So what that meant is, because we were at the bottom of the market then rose, the value of our property went up quite significantly because of the price point that we paid it at. So that's really important to note. And property is hard work. So as a landlord, I'm just quite passionate about being a good landlord. We try not to put the rents up if possible. There's definitely been years we've even discounted the rent to help our tenants. We've held the rent even last year when our buy-to-let mortgage, it went up last year, but we actually felt really called not to put that increase on the tenants last year. So being a Christian landlord, it's just a really good feeling to think that you're actually doing people good who are living in the city, and particularly in an industry where you just get a lot of tricky landlords, let's say, which I'm sure we've all had our experiences of that. So we need more Christians in property. So if that's something that you'd like to talk about more, I'd love to do that. We'll go to investing in the kingdom. So it's everything we do is investing in the kingdom, but we wanted to highlight this point because sometimes you're not going to see the rewards on earth. Sometimes it's like you're sowing, but your reward is definitely going to be in heaven, and you're not always going to get a physical return on it. And it's really healthy to have that mindset. So I just want to encourage us to think about investing in Christian businesses. We've got a lot of self-employed people in the church. Can you help them? Can you invest in them? Consider supporting Christian ministries. Consider family in the church that you can give to. There are struggling people in Rev. Please consider how you can help them if you've got something spare. Think about local needs in your borough, Camden, Islington, Haringey. How can we help those around us if you've got any spare? And ask God to lay on your heart, who can you invest in? That might not generate a return for you, but who can you invest in? And I really wanted to just say about Stefan Davina's housing fund, they still have a shortfall in what they need. I think they've managed to get quite a few investors for that. But again, if you've got Christian parents that would like to invest, speak to people who may have capacity to invest. I just want to encourage you to have that in your minds as well. Financial administration, and I'm going to really whiz through this because we've run out of time, but I thought it important to highlight. This is just general good stuff to do, getting your house in order type stuff. So think about insurance cover, particularly if you've got kids, or if you're married and you've got assets. It's like, if you've got a mortgage and you've got to think about how does your spouse pay for that. So insurance is really important. Or if you've got assets as a single person, it's like, it's not leaving people with debt, upon death. Or if you are, have a period of sickness, having insurance cover in place for that also helps you. So that's just a practical thing to get in place. Wills, again, it's admin, but really important. If you've got assets, it's like, what do you want to be done with that upon your death? And it's just getting things in order. I know it can be a really tricky thing to talk about, but it's important. Jesus spoke about his death so much, so I think we should be comfortable with doing that as well. And just making things easier for people who are left, like what are your wishes, what do you want to do, so that they can carry out what you would like. Lasting power of attorney. Now this is something that I actually have to be honest, Rich and I have done it for our finances. So we've got power of attorney for that, but you can also get power of attorney for your health. So in the case that you are sick and not able to express your wishes yourself, it's appointing someone that can do that on your behalf, a trusted person. So that's something that I need to do, to be honest. But again, it's very important to get your house in order with that. It's basically appointing someone. If you are not around or if you're not able to make your own financial decisions or decisions on your health, it's appointing someone close and trusted to you to make those decisions in that event, and it just makes it easier for those around you to carry out your wishes. And just want to leave you one final thing, and that is just getting financial advice and getting financially literate. It's just really important. We are interacting with this subject, whether or not we are burying our heads in the sand or talking about it. All of us have to pay our bills, our rent, we're working somehow. So we are already interacting with this subject. So I think, we just need to be purposeful, intentional, get the right advice so that we can make wise decisions. And just to round up this section, we've got the, how am I going?
Do you want to skip over this bit? This was the... We're going to come back to that bit, I think. We're going to come back to that last bit because there's a bit of kind of time for reflection, because I appreciate there's been a lot of stuff covered here which we could have covered in sessions in and of itself. But we've got one final mentee moment, if I can give me it. But what we'd love, we said this at the very beginning, so if you, while I'm talking, head over to mentee.com and put that code in at the top. 5677948. We said at the very beginning of this series that we'd like it to be as helpful and as relevant as possible for people at Rev. There's no point talking about a load of stuff that nobody is interested in, or everybody's already well on the way in a particular area. So I wanted to build that third and final session around what comes out of the first two, the conversations that you might have had in small groups, or things that you might not have covered, or that we've covered a little bit, if you'd like to know more. So the first thing, which is more open-ended, is this one here. Are there areas we haven't covered, or areas that we have but you'd like to go deeper in the final session? So I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes so you can have a think about that. And then some of those things will appear on the screen. And then what we'll do is Tanika and I will take this away and we'll use this to build up that third session, which will feature in at least some part another panel discussion, but hopefully more of a kind of a more in-depth one than we had the first time round, with a range of voices feeding into that. So that's the first one. So give a couple of minutes for that question, and then we'll move on to the second question. So I'll just read some of these out as we go. So saving for the longer term, going into more details. Self-employed budgeting, really good. Probably worth saying that we're both salaried. So that's a really, really good one. Let's make sure that that panel includes someone who is self-employed. We can ask them to feed into that. Some of the other ones, saving for a specific goal, for example, buying a house, car, university, things like that. The ethics of investing, how to think about this, work out whether something is ethically sound. Love that one. With Wealthify, you can do an original plan or an ethical plan. We do an ethical plan, which generally doesn't have as good returns, but it takes out any investments associated with certain industries like tobacco or gambling or anything like that. But generally speaking, the returns are slightly lower. And then personal workplace pensions, what and how should we be contributing, and some other stuff. So thanks for that, we'll take that away, and that's really helpful. And then the second one is, if you can ask a Rev anything about how they do their finances, what would it be? It's quite a personal question. And so the purpose of this isn't to kind of like specifically ask people how they do things. It's to get a flavour of the different people that make up Rev. So, for those that were here the first time, we had a panel of four people, all with very different backgrounds, different stages of life and things. And it was really, really helpful, really interesting. And if you haven't caught it, do check it out on the first session. It's really interesting to hear different people's perspectives on the same question. So if you could ask a Rev anything about financial matters, what would it be? So have a think about that, and then if you want to put in some questions there, that'll help us with that panel discussion. Shifting from couple to family with kids, what does that look like financially? Great question. How do you balance the importance of money but not fall into the trap of chasing money? Very good. What do you invest in? Why? What are your individual rates of return? And what did you start with? Very good. Very practical, that one. What else have we got? How do you decide what to regularly give? What percentage of income? So, if that's specifically to do with giving to the church, or if that's to do with giving more broadly, that's definitely something to consider. The way that we consider things as a family is we think of giving as a broader thing, which includes giving to the church, but also includes giving to other people or other circumstances. So that's definitely something we could unpack in that panel. And then I'll just read these last two up, and then we'll go to the final section. How to think about investing if you're unsure if you'll stay in the UK long term. How to get on the property ladder. and not have to leave London? How do you practice generosity if you keep within a budget? What about more spontaneous or spirit-led gifting? Really, really good. It's really helpful, thanks guys. I mean, this will shape up we don't know what it will look like, but it will be all this stuff for the third session, and yeah, we'll get as many voices into that as we can. So, conscious of time, we'll leave it there, and then we'll flick back to the final thing, which I think is a moment of reflection, and we'll do this in small groups before we wrap things up. This bit here. So the final questions to consider in your groups, and what we'll do is we'll wrap up officially here. So if people have got to scoot, because I know it's past 3:30, please feel free to. But we'll say goodbye at this point, and then we'll stop the recording. But for 5 minutes or so, however long you've got in your groups, have a think about these questions. Do you feel God's prompting in any area of stewardship highlighted today? Anything that we've covered that you feel God is speaking to you about specifically? What areas do you think that you might need to improve or work on? Are there any areas that you thought, do you know what, I could maybe do that a bit better, or I haven't thought about that, if that's something that I could improve on? So, small groups, but thank you very much, we'll leave it there, and yeah, feel free to discuss it for as long as you want. Yeah, great if does somebody want to pray for us to wrap things up?
Yeah, God, we thank you so much that our lives are in your hands, and thank you for the wisdom that you have given to Nika and James, and that you make possible for all of us. And we do submit ourselves and our lives to you again, God. We realise that you, Father, hold us, that you are enthroned, and we thank you that we can grapple with these things whilst here on earth, and help us always to have a renewed mind on these aspects of money, Lord. Help us to hold it very lightly, but with wisdom, and very serious and light at the same time. Just pray, Holy Spirit, that you'd be speaking to us now, that we would be people who are generous and invest and have wisdom, and where this has brought up topics which is quite overwhelming, or just something, that could cause anxiety, or maybe a bit of shame as well. Just pray that you, Holy Spirit, would lead us into healing, reveal to us the truth and how we can walk in it, and we pray that we would have the courage to place our feet on your path and your everlasting path, and you will lead us in that way. Amen.